On the morning of June 6, 1944, the largest armada in history set off from the south coast of England to the beaches of Normandy in northern France, hoping to smash a hole in Hitler's fortress Europe and open the front on the west that Joseph Stalin had been urging Churchill and Roosevelt to create. The Normandy coast was divided into 5 zones which from east to west were Sword, Juno, Gold, Omaha and Utah. Normandy was ideal. Its central location meant that the Allies couldn't be cut off if they invaded via a peninsula, and it was nowhere near as heavily defended as Calais, where the Wehrmacht expected the invasion most of all. But why was Omaha Beach so much bloodier than the other D-Day landing zones? Why did so many things go wrong at once? And how did a landing that seemed on the verge of disaster ultimately succeed? Today, we're going to examine the Battle of Omaha Beach hour by hour and uncover why it became the bloodiest and most infamous sector of D-Day for the men of the US Army Rangers and the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions sent there. No account can capture every sector perfectly because Omaha stretched for several miles and conditions varied. Still, historians and survivor testimony give a fairly consistent picture of what the first assault waves experienced, especially in the hardest hit sectors like Dog Green, Easy Red and Easy Green. An extremely important thing to remember, many soldiers had already been awake for most of the night, seasick, soaked, cold and terrified before they even saw the beach. At around 6 a.m, the landing craft are circling offshore in rough seas. Men are packed shoulder to shoulder in Higgins boats. Many are vomiting from seasickness. Some pray. Others sit silently. Engines roar loudly enough that conversation is difficult. Ahead of them is smoke from naval shelling, flashes from German artillery, tracer rounds visible through the haze, and burning craft already in the water. At around the same time, B-24 bombers of the US Air Force flew over Omaha intending to smash the German defense installations before troops arrived on the beach. But due to a combination of overcast skies and the worry that they'd inadvertently bomb their own men, the bombers significantly overshot their targets. They dropped their ordnance sharply inland, with only 3 bombs falling near the beach. Some officers still believe the bombardment has neutralised the defences, but others are beginning to suspect it hasn't. The ramps haven't dropped yet, but men are already being hit by mortar and artillery fragments splashing into the water around the boats. Each soldier is carrying a combination of rifle, ammo, entrenching tool, gas mask, explosives, extra clothing, radios, flamethrower fuel, medical kits and bangalores, a kind of long, narrow explosive. Individual loads often exceeded 70 pounds. At around 6:10 a.m, the first waves move closer. Navigation errors and currents begin scattering units. Some boats drift hundreds of yards off target. Officers struggle to identify landmarks through smoke and spray. German defence positions called Widerstandsnester, resistance nests, are now clearly alive. Machine guns begin firing steadily. Men can actually hear rounds cracking overhead as they break the sound barrier and smacking into steel ramps and wooden obstacles in the surf. Some landing craft are destroyed before ever reaching shore. Others strike hidden sandbars and stop in water far too deep for infantry to wade safely. Far offshore, many of the DD or duplex drive Sherman tanks intended to support the infantry have already sunk in the rough Channel seas. The soldiers often don't know this yet. At about 6:20 the ramps drop, and this is the moment burned into so many survivor accounts. A Higgins boat grinds toward shore, the coxswain shouts, the front ramp drops. Belt-fed German MG-42 machine guns, capable of firing 5 bullets a second, open fire, and the men in the front rows are killed immediately. The guns are pre-sighted onto the exits and tidal flats, and some boats lose half their men in a matter of seconds. Men who by some miracle haven't been hit disembark into the water over the side of the boat in desperation to avoid being torn apart by machine gun fire. The weight of soaked equipment drags men underwater almost instantly. Many drown before even reaching the beach. Survivors later describe bullets hitting water like hail while bodies floated past them, wounded men unable to remove gear, and engineers trying to clear mines while under direct fire. The noise becomes overwhelming. It's a complete sensory overload of machine guns, naval guns, screaming, explosions, engines, and orders that nobody can hear. Command structure starts breaking down almost immediately. The tidal flat at Omaha is extremely exposed. To reach even the relative shelter of the shingle embankment, as is so well depicted in the opening of Saving Private Ryan, troops must cross 200 to 300 yards of open beach under fire from machine guns on the bluffs, mortars, artillery, snipers, and interlocking defensive positions. Some men freeze completely, others run in short bursts, hiding in shell craters and dropping behind obstacles like steel Belgian gates, mine stakes, Czech hedgehogs, and even corpses. Medics begin treating wounded in the open, often being shot themselves. Radio operators struggle to keep equipment functioning after immersion in seawater. Entire units become intermixed. Officers and NCOs are killed at tremendously high rates. In several sectors, survivors later said there was effectively no organised assault at all during these minutes, just individuals or tiny groups of men desperately trying not to die. At around 6:30, some soldiers finally reach the shingle bank or seawall. The shingle is only a narrow strip of stones and sand, but it provides at least some kind of protection from direct fire. Men flatten themselves against it while bullets snap overhead. Many of them discover that their ammunition is soaked, their radios are dead, bangalores are missing, and entire squads are gone. Officers try to reorganise fragmented groups with the goal of getting off the beach as quickly as possible. Engineers begin blowing gaps in obstacles despite devastating casualties. Destroyers offshore start moving dangerously close to shore to fire directly into German strongpoints. In isolated places, small groups begin climbing draws, gullies and bluff edges. These tiny breakthroughs matter enormously. They are the beginning of Omaha's survival. But at the 30-minute mark, the overall picture is still grim enough that some senior commanders offshore fear the landing may fail entirely. For many men pinned to the beach at that moment, there's no sense yet at all that victory is possible, only the immediate problem of surviving the next minute. By 6:30, large parts of Omaha still looked catastrophic. Many assault companies had been obliterated before ever reaching the seawall. Engineers were dying whilst trying to clear obstacles. Radios failed. Landing schedules were collapsing. Smoke and dust and incoming tides made everything worse. Yet, this is also the period when the battle slowly, almost invisibly at first, begins to turn. The surviving troops are mostly trapped in narrow strips behind the shingle, behind seawalls, inside shell craters and behind wrecked landing craft. German fire still dominates the open sand. The defenders are not simply firing blindly. The machine gun positions are elevated on bluffs with carefully planned interlocking arcs. Mortars are especially deadly because troops have almost nowhere to hide. Some sectors are so exposed that movement of even a few yards can get men killed. Officers and sergeants begin gathering whoever they can, units mixed together, strangers from different regiments, engineers, medics and tank crews without tanks. Formal organisation is largely gone. What emerges instead are improvised groups built around whoever's still functional and able to move. A phrase repeated in many accounts is "get off the beach." Not take the objective, not advance according to plan, just get off the beach, because everyone understands the beach itself is a death trap. And what makes this death trap even more dangerous is that the incoming tide steadily shrinks the exposed area as the morning progresses. Wounded men drown as water rises around them. Destroyed equipment and bodies begin piling together near the seawall and obstacles. New landing waves arriving behind the first assault sometimes have no idea how bad conditions are until the ramps drop. Some units land directly into congestion and confusion, arriving from burning craft to find wounded men everywhere, obstacles which haven't been cleared, officers dead and no command structure, and most horrifyingly, the view of a complete death trap with no visible path inland. At several moments the landing threatens to seize up entirely. One of the crucial turning points comes from offshore at around 7 to 7:30. American destroyers begin moving extraordinarily close to Omaha, sometimes within around 1,000 yards of shore, dangerously shallow for ships of their size. From there, they fire directly into German strongpoints visible on the bluffs. This matters enormously. Earlier bombardment had largely been indirect and imprecise, but now naval gunners can sometimes directly identify exact machine gun nests and bunker apertures. Survivors repeatedly recalled the huge psychological impact and morale boost of suddenly seeing shells slam directly into cliff positions, hearing enemy fire temporarily stop, and realising that somebody was finally backing them up and hitting the defences. The destroyers played an absolutely critical role in the landing. And here comes the real turning point tactically, with small groups starting to climb the bluffs. The German defences were strongest facing the beach frontally, but they were very vulnerable once American troops reached the high ground from the sides or rear. Small groups begin infiltrating through draws, up erosion gullies, along poorly defended slopes and through gaps blown by engineers. These attacks are usually not large coordinated assaults, but typically groups of 5 or 10 men, maybe even 20, sometimes led by lieutenants, sometimes by sergeants, or by just whoever happened to keep moving. No single dramatic breakthrough happens. Instead, the German defence is chipped away piece by piece. And what's the German perspective of this operation? The defenders initially believe they're succeeding, and in many sectors they are. Some German positions fire almost continuously for hours. But they also face their own wealth of problems, such as communication disruptions, naval gunfire, isolation, smoke obscuring visibility, increasing attacks from unexpected directions, and uncertainty about where the main Allied effort is. Once American troops begin appearing on the heights behind some strong points, bunkers designed to fire seaward become very vulnerable. A bunker can be terrifying from the front, but weak from the rear entrance or ventilation points. From 8 o'clock to around 9:30, the landing is still extremely dangerous, but by now the character of the battle changes. Instead of men dying helplessly in surf, it increasingly becomes infantry fighting through defensive networks inland and succeeding. More troops get ashore. Some tanks finally arrive and provide direct fire support. Engineers clear exits. Officers establish fragments of command posts. Medics organise casualty collection points. The troops still don't control Omaha securely, but they now possess multiple footholds above the beach, and that changes everything. Offshore, meanwhile, High Command receives fragmented reports of massive casualties, units destroyed, exits blocked, and troops pinned down. At times there is genuine fear that the landing may have to be abandoned in parts of Omaha. General Omar Bradley later wrote that he considered that possibility. But communication failures also mean commanders don't yet realise that small penetrations inland are gradually succeeding. The battle is turning before many leaders fully understand it. By late morning, several exits are opened, more artillery and vehicles begin landing, German strongpoints are increasingly isolated, and American troops push inland in scattered but growing numbers. The beach is still full of dead and wounded, and sniper and artillery fire continue all day, but the initial crisis at the start of the landing has been overcome. What saved Omaha was not a single decisive event. It was the accumulation of hundreds of small actions, engineers clearing gaps, destroyers firing close offshore, junior leaders improvising, isolated squads climbing bluffs, medics keeping men moving, and soldiers pushing themselves forward despite catastrophic losses. That gradual shift from pinned survivors to advancing groups is what transformed Omaha from a possible disaster into a successful landing. One of the most fascinating aspects of D-Day was the operation to convince the German military that Normandy was not the main point of invasion. In fact, this operation was so successful that German commanders continued to believe that Normandy wasn't the main invasion, even after tens of thousands of troops had landed in France. The deception plan, known as Operation Fortitude, convinced the Germans that the real invasion would come across the shortest channel crossing at Calais. The Allies reinforced this with fake armies, dummy tanks, fake radio traffic, double agents, and even the fictitious George S. Patton commanding an army in southeast England. When reports started to come in to German High Command on the 6th of June 1944, many generals assumed that Normandy was a diversion. And that logic seemed reasonable because Calais was much closer to England, it had better ports, and German intelligence had been conditioned for months to expect the main blow there. As a result, some of Germany's strongest formations remained in the Calais area waiting for a second, larger landing. Even after the Allies had secured beachheads and landed hundreds of thousands of men, Hitler and much of the German High Command remained suspicious that Normandy might be a feint. And of course, this was exactly what the Allies wanted. The deception network continued operating well after D-Day. Double agents like Juan Puyol Garcia kept reporting that the fictional army group in England was still preparing for the real invasion of Calais. As late as mid-June, German intelligence assessments were still warning that the main attack was yet to come. There wasn't really a single clearly defined moment when someone announced Normandy is the main invasion. Instead, belief gradually eroded away during June and July 1944. A key time frame is often considered late June to early July, when it became impossible to ignore the scale of the Allied build-up in Normandy. Massive ports and logistics facilities were operating. Hundreds of thousands of troops were ashore. The front was expanding and there was no sign of a second invasion. Yet remarkably, German forces remained concentrated in the Calais region for weeks longer than they otherwise might have. Even in July, some commanders worried about a second landing. And this was the real success of Operation Fortitude, convincing them that they shouldn't move their reserves after D-Day, because the fighting could have been even more difficult had these formations been rushed to Normandy straight away. By the time the Germans fully accepted that Normandy was the decisive front, the Allies had already established an overwhelming foothold in France, from where they would liberate the nation after just 80 days after D-Day, when they arrived in Paris on the 25th of August 1944.